The hall smelled of everyone but her. That was the cruelty of the choosing, Eloan thought, standing in the center of the ring in a dress her mother had taken in twice. 200 wolves had gathered in the great lodge of Ashfell, and every one of them carried a scent, like a signature on the air. Pine and wood smoke, rain on cold stone. The bright nervous sweetness of young omegas, hoping to be picked. You could read the whole room with your eyes shut, know who loved whom, who feared what, who lied. Every wolf but her. Eloan stood in the middle of all that scent and gave the air nothing at all. Scentless, someone whispered near the front. The way another person might say, cursed. She kept her chin level. She had spent 22 years learning to keep her chin level, and she was not going to lose the skill tonight of all nights. The drums began. Caden came through the crowd the way he always did, as though the floor had been laid for him personally, broad and gold-haired and easy in his own skin. Their fathers had shaken hands over the two of them when Eloan was 4 years old, an old promise settling old debts. For 18 years she had been told that whatever else she lacked, she at least had this. It had been arranged. He stopped in front of her, and the whole hall leaned in. For one breath, she let herself believe it. There was something almost like apology in his face, and she thought, he is going to do the decent thing. Then his nostrils flared, the motion every wolf made when scenting the air, and she watched his face change. He was reaching for her scent the way he would reach for any mate's, and there was nothing to catch. I can't, Cadan said. The words were quiet, but the lodge had gone so still that they carried to the rafters. Cadan, she said, steadier than she felt. We were promised. I can't bond to what I can't scent. He said it almost gently, and that was the worst of it. There's no wolf in you to answer mine, Eloan. A mating is a bond of scent and soul, and you have neither to give, sept. He turned his head, and across the ring a dark-haired alpha woman stepped forward as though she had been waiting for the cue. I choose Odette. The hall exhaled all at once. Odette smiled, cool and complete, and let him take her hand. Eloan did not run, and she did not weep. She stood in the emptied circle while the pack she had been born into looked at her with a pity so thick it was almost tender, and pity, she had long ago decided, was the one thing she could not survive in quantity. The elders were kind about the casting out, which somehow made it colder. They gave her a small purse of silver, her mother's share, and until the new moon to be gone, she did not wait. A notice on the postwriter's board offered a cottage in the far valley of Hollowmere, sight unseen, the price a joke, cheap because the valley was empty, and the house had a name. Cursed, the last owner had written. Eloan almost laughed, for she knew something about that word, and paid the whole purse before she could think better of it. The journey took 5 days, 4 by cart and 1 on foot, until the trees gave out, and there was only the valley between gray hills, one small stone cottage at the bottom, with its back against the rock. By the time she reached the door, the light was failing. She let herself in. The place was cold and close and smelled of dust and thyme, which suited her, and for once she thought she might breathe here. Then she saw the wall. The far wall of the main room had cracked and bowed outward in a long seam, as though something behind it had swelled, or was pushing to get out. A draught came through it, though there was no window on that side. She crossed to it, set her candle down, and pressed her fingers to the broken edge, and a fist-sized piece of plaster came away in her hand and shattered on the floor. Behind it was not stone. Behind it was paint. She widened the gap with shaking fingers, and the candlelight fell on color on a jaw, on a scar, cut clean through one dark eyebrow, on a pair of eyes, gray as the winter hills outside, painted with such terrible care that they seemed to move as her flame guttered, seemed to find her and fix on her across however many years they had been sealed inside this wall. They were a king's eyes. She had seen that face on old coins, and the coins were older than her grandmother. Eloan did not sleep. She sat on the floor, with her back to the cold hearth, and her candle burning down, and she looked at the face in the wall until the wick drowned itself in its own wax. By first light, she had begun to uncover the rest. It was careful work, easing the dead plaster away with the flat of a knife without scoring the paint beneath, and it took her most of the morning. When it was done, she sat back on her heels and looked at the whole of what someone had gone to such trouble to hide. It was a portrait, life-sized, painted onto a wooden panel, set into the wall, and then buried behind lath and plaster as though to erase it from the world. A man in his middle 30s, dark-haired, broad through the shoulders, wearing the gray and silver of a house she half remembered from a child's book of kings. The scar through the eyebrow gave him a look that should have been hard and somehow was not. The painter had caught something at the corner of his mouth, some private grief held very still, and Eloan found she could not stop looking at it. A small brass plate was set into the base of the frame. She rubbed the tarnish away with her thumb. Emeric of Vielmore, it read. The last Wolf King. She knew the name the way everyone knew it, from songs rather than from memory. Emeric of Vielmore had ruled the northern Pax before the Pax broke apart, and he had died, vanished, betrayed, and lost. The song said, the better part of 40 years ago. There was no possible way the man in this portrait had ever set foot in a cottage this humble, and no reason on the earth his likeness should be sealed inside its wall. She had grown up on the songs the way every pup in the north had. The last Wolf King, who had held 9 quarreling packs under one banner and one law. The king, who had gone into the mountains one autumn to answer a friend's summons, and simply never come back down. Some songs said he had been murdered by a rival. Some said he had walked willingly into the dark to spare his people a war. All of them agreed on the ending, which was that the crown had fallen and the north had shattered into feuding scraps, and that no one had worn it since. Cadan wanted that crown, she thought suddenly, remembering the hungry gleam in his eye whenever he spoke of the old days. Everyone with ambition wanted that crown. And here, its rightful owner's face lay sealed in the wall of a cottage, sold for the price of a good goat. You should not have done that. Eloan was on her feet before she knew she had moved the knife out in front of her, her heart going like a snared bird. A man stood in the open doorway with the white valley light behind him, and for one lurching moment, she thought the portrait had come loose from the wall and walked. He was older than the painted man, far older, his dark hair gone through with iron and his face weathered by more winters than she could count, and he leaned his weight on a long staff of black wood, but the shoulders were the same. The scar through the eyebrow was the same, silvered now, but unmistakable. And the eyes, gray as the winter hills, were exactly, impossibly the same. That wall was closed for a reason, the man said. Who are you? Her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that. The question, he said, and his gaze moved past her to the uncovered portrait, and something crossed his face like a shadow crossing snow, is who told you that cottage was empty? It was for sale. I bought it. I have the paper. She lifted her chin. It is mine now and everything in it. No, he said the word without heat, which made it worse. It was never anyone's to sell, and what is in that wall was never yours to buy. You have paid good silver for a grave, girl, and I would take it kindly if you would leave the dead in it. Eloan looked from the ruined old man in the doorway to the young king sealed in the wall, from the living scar to the painted one, and the knife lowered in her hand of its own accord. You're him, she said. You're the man in the portrait. The valley wind moved through the doorway between them, and for the first time in her life, Eloan strained toward a scent, his scent, whatever it was. The thing that would tell her who and what she was dealing with, and caught nothing at all. He gave the air nothing, just like her. He did not answer her that first day. He turned and walked back out into the light, moving slower than his shoulders suggested he should, leaning on the black staff. And Eloan stood in her cursed and grave-filled cottage, and watched the last living king of the north limp away across the grass toward a low stone house tucked into the hillside a quarter-mile off. A house she had not even seen the night before. She should have been afraid. Any sensible woman would have packed her one bag and walked the 5 days back to whatever was left of her life. But there was nothing left of her life, and the whole reason she had come to the loneliest valley in the north was to be somewhere that no one would look at her with pity. She had that here at least. The old man had looked at her with a great many things, but pity had not been one of them, so she stayed. She learned him the way you learn weather. He came at dusk, the first few evenings, always at dusk, and never inside. He would lower himself onto the flat stone by her door, with his staff across his knees, and say almost nothing, and after the second evening, she took to sitting in the doorway with a bowl of whatever thin thing she had cooked, and they would watch the dark come down into the valley together in a silence that was, she slowly understood, not unfriendly. It should have unsettled her more than it did, sharing the quiet with a man out of a song, a man who by every account she had ever heard had been dead since before her mother was born. But there was a plainness to him that made the impossible ordinary. He complained about his knees. He had opinions about how she banked her fire, and they were correct, and he shared them without asking whether she wanted them. On the second evening, he watched her struggle to split a length of green wood, said nothing for a long while, and then observed that she was fighting the grain instead of reading it, which was, he added, a fault he had seen in a great many people who had come to bad ends. She had glared at him. He had almost, not quite, smiled. His name was Emmerich. He gave her that on the third evening, and did not pretend it was a common name, and did not explain how a man could carry a dead king's face and a dead king's name, and be sitting on a stone in the middle of nowhere, with soup going cold in his hands. She did not push. She of all people understood the wish to keep one true thing back from the world. He was, she noticed, careful with her in ways she was not used to being handled. When a sudden squall came up the valley, on the third night, and she stood too long in the doorway watching the sky turn the color of a bruise, he told her plainly to go in and shut the door before the cold got into her chest, and then he went home, rather than let her feel she was turning him out into it. When he caught her, once, favoring the blistered heel she had earned on the last day's walk, he said nothing at all. But the next dusk, he set a small clay pot of salve on her doorstep without a word, and did not wait to be thanked. No one in Asheville had done her a kindness in years that did not come wrapped in pity, that did not make her smaller in the taking of it. Emmerich's kindnesses cost her nothing. He offered them the way another man might mention the weather, and then he let them lie, and something in her that had been clenched tight for a very long time began cautiously to unclench. "You keep your face turned from the light," she said on the fourth evening. She had been watching him do it for 3 days. Whenever the last of the sun came slanting gold up the valley, he would angle his head, tip the brim of his old hood, and put the ruin of his scar into shadow. "Why, you keep something turned away yourself," he said, without rancor. "I have not asked you what." She went quiet at that. She had not told him. She had not told anyone in this valley the thing that had emptied her out and sent her north, and she had assumed, with a bitter kind of relief, that here at last was a place where no one could tell, because here at last was a man who, like her, put no scent into the world for anyone to read. "You can't scent me," she said slowly, testing the shape of it aloud. "That first day in the cottage. You reached for it, the same as I reached for yours, and there was nothing there. For either of us." Something in his weathered face went still and careful. "No," he agreed. "There was not." "Why?" She set her bowl down and leaned toward him, and all the old hurt she had carried 5 days up the north road came up with the words, before she could stop it. "Why can't I scent you? Every wolf carries a scent. My whole pack could read one another across a hall like a page of a book, and it was the one thing I could never do and never give, and they cast me out for it. They said there was no wolf in me, no soul to bond. And now I have come to the very end of the earth to be rid of them, and I have found the one other person alive who is as empty of it as I am. That is not chance. Nothing is that unlucky twice. So tell me why. For a long moment, she thought he would stand and limp away, as he had the first day. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and she had the sudden, vertiginous sense of being seen the way the painter in the wall had seen him, all the way down to the bottom. I put no cent into the world, Emmerich said at last, because I have no wolf left to make one. Mine was not withheld from me. The way you have been taught yours was. Mine was taken. A long time ago, in this valley, on a night I have spent 40 years, trying and failing to forget, by a man I would have died for, and nearly did. His hand tightened until the old knuckles stood out white. That is why the portrait was sealed, in the wall. That is why the valley stands empty, and the house is called cursed, and no one from these parts will come within a mile of it after dark. They are not wrong to keep away. Things happened here that should not happen, and something of them lingers still. You would be wise to be gone before you learn what. And you? She asked. Why do you stay, if it is cursed? The old king looked out at the dark valley, at the ruin of the hills he had once ruled, and when he spoke, his voice had gone somewhere far off. Because it is mine to guard, what little is left of it. He rose, then, slow and sore, and made his way back across the grass to his own house, and Aloan sat in her doorway, long after he had gone, turning it over. A wolf with no wolf, a scent that had been taken, not never given. She had spent her whole life believing she was broken, in a way that had no cause and no cure. A defect a person was simply born carrying. But here was a man whose emptiness had a cause. Here was a man who had once had a wolf, a scent, a soul to bond, and had lost it. Emptiness, it turned out, could be a wound as easily as a birth. She was not sure why that mattered so much to her. She only knew that it did, that something in her chest had loosened at the thought, the first loosening in longer than she could remember. That night she could not sleep for thinking about it. She lay in the dark of her stolen cottage and stared at the pale rectangle where the portrait watched over her, and somewhere past midnight she became aware, slowly, the way you become aware of a sound that has been going on a long time, that the house was not silent. There was a low warmth in the walls, a pulse, almost faint as a heartbeat, heard through deep water, coming from the stone at her back where the cottage met the hill. She rose and crossed the cold floor and pressed her palm flat to the plaster beside the portrait, and the warmth was there, under her hand, patient and old, and waiting, and it was not the warmth of any fire. And she remembered then a thing she had noticed without noticing. When Emmerich had walked away that first day, the crack in the wall had gone dark and cold. But on the evenings he came to sit at her door, the whole house had seemed, just faintly, to breathe. The house answered to him. Whatever slept in these stones, it knew when its king was near, and it woke a little to greet him, the way a dog lifts its head at a familiar step on the road. Eloan stood very still in the dark, with her hand against the wall, and the dead king's painted eyes upon her, and understood that she had bought her way into the middle of something far older and far larger than a cheap cottage and a broken heart. And she understood one thing more, a thing that frightened her and steadied her in the same breath. For the first time since the choosing, since long before the choosing, she was not the strangest or the most cursed thing in the room. She was not sure whether to weep at that or laugh. She was still turning it over, her palm warm against the breathing wall, when she finally slept, and her dreams were full of gray eyes, and a second heart beating slow in the stone. The valley did not stay a secret. Valleys never do. A woman came up the track on the 6th day, driving a small cart of provisions, and introduced herself as Marin from the last village down the road, the one that traded with the high farms. She was broad and shrewd and unafraid, which Eloan liked immediately, and she looked at the cottage with its uncovered portrait through the open door and did not flinch, which Eloan liked even more. "So it's true," Marin said, unloading sacks of flour and dried apple as though delivering to a haunted house were the most ordinary errand in the world. "Somebody's living in the old grave house at last. We had a wager on it, down in the village. Most said you'd be gone in 3 days." She jerked her chin at the doorway, at the painted gray eyes. "You've met him, then? The keeper? You know about him." "Everyone in the low valley knows there's an old man up here who's older than he's any right to be, and that the house you've bought, the king's house, talks to him and to no one else." Marin said it plainly, without fear, and without much wonder, the way country people say the things that city people would call impossible. "My grandmother knew it. Her grandmother knew it before her. We don't come up after dark, and we don't ask him his business, and in return he keeps whatever's in this valley from ever coming down into ours. That's the arrangement, and it's held for a lifetime and more, so we don't go poking at it." She shrugged. "You'll want salt." Nobody who wrote that notice thought to mention, "There's no salt within a day's walk." I brought salt. Eloan paid her in the last of her coppers, and because she had spoken to no living soul but a wolfless king in nearly a week, she found herself talking. Not all of it, but some. That she had come from Ashfell, in the south. That she had been meant to mate, and had not. Marin's shrewd eyes sharpened at the name. Ashfell. That's Cadden's pack. Eloan's stomach dropped. "You know Cadden?" "I know the name. Everyone up and down the trade road knows the name this season." Marin set the salt down and looked at her with something that was not pity, thank the moon, but was uncomfortably near it. "The golden alpha of Ashfell who's marrying up and aiming higher. Word is he's not content to be first son of a border pack anymore. Ward is he's been paying calls on the old families, the ones who still remember when the whole North answered to a single crown, and talking about reunion, about bringing the broken packs back under one banner, about a new king to do it." She snorted. "About himself, in other words, wearing a crown that stood empty for 40 years. The valley wind went cold against the back of Eloan's neck. An empty crown, 40 years empty. The exact span of years between a young king in a wall and the old man on the stone. "Why?" Eloan said carefully. "Would a man who wants an empty crown trouble himself over a scentless omega he cast off in front of 200 people? He wouldn't, not for herself." Marin climbed back onto her cart and gathered the reins, and paused. And this time she looked genuinely uneasy. "But it's a strange thing, and since you're going to be my neighbor, I'll tell it you plain. 3 days after you'd have come up this road, riders came through the low village, asking after a young woman traveling north alone. Ashfell colors on them. I told them I'd seen no one, because I hadn't. Not yet." She looked at Eloan steadily. "They weren't asking the way you ask after someone you've thrown away and forgotten, mind. They were asking the way you ask after something valuable you've lost and mean to get back." She clicked her tongue, and the cart rolled off down the track, and Eloan stood in the cold, with her arms full of salt and her mind racing after it. That evening, Emmerich did not come to the stone by her door. She waited past dusk, past the hour he always came, and the house stayed dark and cold at her back, and at last she pulled her shawl around her shoulders and walked the quarter-mile to the low stone house in the hillside herself. She had never gone to him. It felt like crossing a line drawn in the grass, one they had both been careful, without ever speaking of it, not to cross. She found him standing at his own doorway, staff in hand, his ruined face turned full into the last of the light for once, not angled away, not hidden. He was staring down the valley toward the south road, and he did not seem to hear her come. "You didn't come tonight," she said. No, he did not look at her. The wind changed today. It came up from the south, the first such wind since you arrived, and it carried something on it I had not smelled in 40 years. His knuckles were white where he gripped the staff. "I told you I have no wolf. That is true. But a man can remember a scent long after he has lost the nose to catch it, the way he remembers a voice or a face, or the exact weight of a hand that once held a knife to his throat. And what came up my valley on the south wind today, girl, was the scent of the man who took my wolf from me. Older now. Fainter. But his. I would know it at the bottom of the sea. Eloin's mouth had gone dry. That's not possible. You said it was 40 years ago. He'd be ancient. He'd be dead. Wolves who take what is not theirs. Emeric said quietly, do not age as they are meant to. I am proof enough of that. In the other direction, standing before you, with a young man's face gone old too slow. He turned, then, at last, and fixed her with those gray-painted eyes made flesh, and there was something in them that had not been there on any of the dusks before, something that had come awake and did not mean to sleep again. Someone from your Ashfell has been asking the trade road after a young woman traveling north, and on the same wind an enemy I buried so deep in my own memory that I had half convinced myself I dreamed him has walked back into my valley. You want to tell me those two things have nothing to do with one another. I would dearly like to believe you, but I have not survived 40 years in this grave by believing the things I would like to. The south wind gusted between them, cold and full of pine and far-off smoke, and Eloin realized with a slow, creeping horror that she could smell it. The pine, the distant wood smoke. That for the first time in her 22 scentless years the wind was carrying something to her, faint and impossible, at the very edge of sense, blooming so quietly she had almost mistaken it for memory. She did not tell him. She did not yet have the words for what it meant, and she was afraid, deep down, that he might. But somewhere down the dark length of the south road, something was climbing the valley toward the two of them. And the dead king's house at her back, which for 6 nights had breathed slow and patient in its sleep, had begun to breathe again faster now, and shallow and afraid. He did not send her away the next morning, though she woke braced for it. She found him at first light, standing in her doorway with 2 hairs already skinned, and a look on his face like a man who has argued with himself all night and lost. If you will not go, he said, and you will not, I can see that, then you will at least learn how to keep yourself alive up here, starting today. And that was how the golden days began, though neither of them would have called them that at the time. He taught her the valley, how to read the weather off the shoulder of the eastern hill, which of the cold springs ran clean and which ran bitter, where the old snares were set, and how to reset them. He was a hard teacher and an honest one, and he did not soften a single thing for her, and Eloin, who had spent her whole life being handled like something that might break or something already broken, found she could have wept with the plain relief of it. He expected her to manage, so she managed. There was an afternoon a little way into it, that she kept afterward, like a smooth stone in a pocket. He had walked her up to the high shoulder of the valley, to show her how the whole of it lay, the cottage and his hillside house, small as toys below, the south road a pale thread unspooling toward the world she had left. The wind was clean and enormous up there. He named the far peaks for her, the old names, the ones the songs had forgotten, and told her a story about each that she suspected he was making up as he went, because 2 of them contradicted each other, and he did not seem to care, and she laughed at him, and he let her. And for a little while, neither of them said anything true or heavy or frightening at all. It was, she realized on the walk down, the first afternoon of her entire life, that she had spent simply being glad to be somewhere, with someone, for no reason at all. She had not known you were allowed. And in the evenings, at last, he came inside. It happened without ceremony. A storm came howling down the valley on the 9th night, the kind that made the shutters scream, and he was halfway across the grass to his own house when she called out that only a fool walked into weather like that, and he might as well wait it out by her fire. He stood in the rain a moment considering it, and she understood that she was asking him to cross a line he had drawn for himself a very long time ago, longer than she had been alive. Then he ducked under her lintel, shedding water, and sat down in the second chair by her hearth, as though he had done it 1,000 times, and the house at her back gave a long, low sigh of settling warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. After that he came inside every evening, and the evenings changed. They talked, moon above, how they talked. She had not known, she had so many words in her. 22 years of words she had swallowed, because there had been no one safe to spend them on. He drew them out without seeming to try. And in return, he gave her pieces of himself, carefully, the way a man pays out rope over a drop, testing each length before he trusts his weight to it. He told her about being the second son, never meant for the crown, happier in a saddle at the edge of the packlands than in any hall. He told her about the war that had made him king, the one that had killed his brother, and how he had spent the rest of his reign trying to make certain no one's brother had to die that way again. He told her about the friend. Then, the one thing he had never told her before, though he did not use the name, a wolf he had loved, like his own blood. A wolf who had stood at his shoulder through the war and the peace after, whom he had trusted with the guarding of his own life. There is a kind of theft, he said, staring into her fire, that cannot be done by a stranger. It can only be done by someone you have already handed the key. I gave him everything. My back, my sleep, the road ahead of me. And one night in this valley, he took the thing underneath all of that, the thing I did not know a man could take, and he left me a shell wearing a king's face, and he walked out of the world with my wolf, riding inside him like a stolen horse. His jaw worked. A wolf without its wolf should die. The same night Eloan, mine did not. Something in this valley would not let me go. So, I have worn on, for 40 years past the hour. I should have ended, aging too slow and unable to die. A candle, no one will let gutter out. It is not the gift the songs make it sound. She did not offer him comfort because she had learned by then that he did not want it and would only close like a fist if she tried. Instead, she reached across the small space between their chairs, and before she could talk herself out of it, laid her hand over his, where it rested on the black staff. He went, very still. His hand was warm and rough and enormous under hers, and for a moment she felt him hold his breath, felt the war in him between pulling away and not. And he did not pull away, and something passed between them in the firelight that neither of them was brave enough yet to name. Then she took her hand back, because she was not cruel, and because she could see what it cost him. Then we are a matched pair, she said lightly, giving him the mercy of a way out. You have too much of a thing you cannot use, and I have never had it at all. Between the two of us, we might make one whole ordinary wolf, and wouldn't that be a disappointment to everybody? For a moment he only looked at her. And then Emeric of Vaelmore, the last wolf king, put his head back and laughed. A real laugh, rusty and astonished. The laugh of a man who has not used the muscle in a very long time, and finds to his surprise that it still works. The house rang with it. The warmth in the walls flared bright as a banked fire, suddenly fed, and Eloan felt it wash over her back like sunlight. And she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, I would do a great deal to hear that sound again. That was the night it happened. He had gone home finally, near the small hours, and she was lying in the dark with the good ache of the day in her arms and legs and the memory of that laugh keeping her warm, when she caught it a scent. Faint, close, threaded through the smell of wood smoke and the clean cold coming under the door, warm, living. It carried something in it of crushed green stems and rain on hot stone, and underneath a low sweetness she had no name for, because she had never in her life had cause to name it. She sat up in the dark, her heart slamming, and turned her head, hunting the source of it the way she had watched other wolves hunt a scent 1,000 times and never once been able to do herself. The scent was coming from her own skin. She lifted her wrist to her face with a hand that had begun to shake, and breathed in, and there it was, unmistakable, rising off her like heat off a stone at the end of a long summer day. After 22 years of giving the air nothing, of being nothing the wolves could read, of standing in crowded halls, as blank and closed as a shuttered house, she was giving the world something at last. She breathed it in again and again, greedy for it, this proof made of nothing but air, that she was not, and had never been, the empty thing they had all named her. Tears came, and she let them, because these at least were not tears of grief. Somewhere under her ribs, a warmth had kindled to answer the warmth in the walls, and she understood, without being able to say how she understood, that the two were the same fire. And then her second thought came, hard on the heels of the first, and dropped into her like a stone into a well. If she could smell it, so could anyone. A locked door had opened in her, yes, but a door opens both ways, and she was no longer hidden, no longer safe, no longer the one wolf in the north that could not be found by scent. Somewhere down the south road, on a wind that had already carried an old king his enemy, there were riders in ashfell colors hunting the hills for a young woman who had, until a handful of nights ago, been impossible to track at all. She had spent her whole life wishing to be found. She lay awake until dawn, wishing, now, that she could be lost again. She understood it now, or thought she did. In the long sleepless hours before dawn, she was not broken. She had never been broken. She had simply been a locked door, with no one to fit the key. And here, in the one valley in the world, where she had never expected to be wanted, something had turned in the lock. Her scent had woken. It had woken near him. She was not fool enough to pretend she did not know what that meant. Whatever the reason, whatever the cost. There was one person alive who had done what her whole pack had sworn could never be done, who had reached the wolf they all said she did not have, and she was blooming for him, like a plant that had waited its whole life to find the sun. By the time the light came up gray over the eastern hill, she had made up her mind, and Eloin, once her mind was made, had never been good at waiting. She went to him at his own door, which she had done only once before, and she did not let herself think about it too hard, for fear of losing her nerve. He was at his table, mending a snare. He looked up, and whatever he saw in her face made him set the wire down very slowly. "Something has changed in me," she said. "Since I came here, since you. I think you know what it is, better than I do. And I am tired of not saying true things out loud. I have spent my whole life being told there was nothing in me for anyone to want, and I came all the way to the end of the world believing it, and then I found you, and you looked at me like I was a person and not a wound, and something in me that everyone swore was dead has been waking up ever since." Her voice did not break, though it wanted to. "I am asking you to let it. Whatever this is between us, I am asking you to let it be real." For a long moment, Emmerich did not move at all. And then something terrible happened in his face, something she would remember for a long time after, a kind of grief, so old and so deep that it had worn a channel in him, the way water wears stone. "No," he said. Just that. The same word he had said in her doorway on the first day, when she had told him the cottage was hers. It landed the same way. "Emmerich, you do not know what you are asking." He stood, and the black staff was in his hand, and he would not look at her. "I cannot give you what you want. There is nothing in me to give. A bond is made between two wolves, and I have no wolf, only the hole where one used to be. And I will not let you tie the one true thing that has ever woken in you to a dead man's grave. Go back inside, please. That is the kindest thing I have to offer you, and I am offering it. Go inside." She went. Not because she agreed, but because her pride would not let her stand there one heartbeat longer, with her heart in her open hands and his refusal lying in it. She went back to her cottage, and she shut the door, and she pressed her forehead to the cold breathing wall, and she did not weep, because she had promised herself long ago that she would not weep over a man who did not want her. And she meant to keep the promise even now, even here, even for him. It was dusk when she heard the voices. She had gone out for water, and then found herself walking, the way she had once before, toward the low stone house in the hillside, and Marin's cart stood outside it, the two of them talking low in the doorway. She stopped a little way off, close enough now to hear, and the still evening carried it to her. At first light, Emmerich was saying, "You will take her down to the village, and you will put her on the first cart south, and you will not tell her I asked you to. Tell her it is not safe. That much is true. And is it the whole truth?" Marin's voice dry. A silence. Then so quiet that Eloin had to strain, and wished she had not. "Her scent has come in. I cannot smell it, but I can feel the change in her, the way you feel a fire in the next room. She is blooming, Marin, and she is blooming toward me, and I am the worst thing in the world for her to bloom toward. A blooming omega is a beacon. Varric will feel it long before he reaches this valley, if he has not already. And when he comes, he will not care that she is only a girl who bought the wrong house. He took my wolf to unmake a king. He will take her to finish it." His voice went ragged. "Every day she stays near me, she shines a little brighter. And every day she shines, she comes a little closer to dying for it. I have buried everything I ever loved in this valley. I will not bury her too. Send her away. Send her away while loving her is still the only thing it costs me." Eloin stood in the dark, with the water forgotten in her hands, and understood that she had been wrong about the shape of her grief all day. He did not fail to want her. He wanted her so much that he was going to send her out of his life at dawn, to keep her breathing and call it kindness, and let her think it was rejection, so that she would go without fighting. That was worse. That was so much worse. She sank down against the cold wall of his house, and something long held gave way at last, and Eloin put her face in her hands. They did not have until dawn. It came in the black hour before it, when the valley was at its deepest, and even the wind had lain down to sleep. Eloin had not gone back to bed. She was sitting in her doorway, wrapped in her shawl, wide awake, turning over everything she had overheard and everything she meant to say, when the sun came up and Marin's cart came for her, when the house behind her stopped breathing. It did not slow, it did not sigh. It simply stopped, all at once, the way a person stops when a hand closes over their mouth, and the silence that came after was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Night after night since she came, she had fallen asleep to that slow, patient pulse without ever calling it comfort, and only now in its absence did she understand it had been comfort all along, and that something had frightened the oldest thing in the valley into holding its breath. Then she caught the scent. Her own new sense, so lately woken, brought it to her whole and terrible on the still air, coming up the grass from the south. It was old. It was wrong. It smelled of iron and cold ash, and underneath, of something that had once been a wolf and had spoiled in the keeping, like meat kept too long in a cellar, sweet and rotten at the same time. Every hair on her body stood up. She was on her feet without deciding to be. "Emmerich," she said, not loud, and she came to her feet to run for him, but he was already coming. A shape was crossing the dark grass from the hillside toward the cottage, faster than his ruined body had any right to move. The black staff in one hand, and she understood that he had felt it too, or the house had woken him, and that he was not fleeing the danger, but coming straight into it, toward her. "Inside," he called, his voice torn, reaching the door as she stood frozen in it. "Eloin, get inside, now!" And then his eyes went wide, with a fear she had never seen in him, not for himself, never once for himself. She never saw it clearly, and she was glad of that, later. A shape peeled itself out of the deeper black at the corner of the cottage, low and fast and far too large, moving the way nothing that old had any right to move, and it was not coming for the wolfless king at the door. It went past him as though he were furniture. It came for her, for the bright new beacon of her, for the blooming thing that had lit up the whole valley like a candle in a window, and Eloin had one frozen instant to understand that everything Emmerich had said in the dark had been exactly true. Then he was between them. She did not see him move. One moment he was in the doorway, shouting her name, and the next he was in front of her, and he had thrown the whole ruined weight of himself into the path of the thing that had come to take her, an old man with no wolf and no scent and nothing left to fight with, but 40 stubborn years of refusing to die, and the impact of it was like a tree coming down. She heard him make a sound she would hear in her sleep for a long time. She felt his blood, shockingly hot, across her face and her outflung hands. She saw him fold. The shape checked, thwarted, snarling, and slid back into the dark to gather itself, and for one held breath, the valley was empty of everything but the two of them. Emmerich lay in the wet grass at her feet, folded around the wound the way a hand folds around a coal, and his gray eyes found hers in the dark, and his mouth moved. No sound came out. But she read it on his lips, the last thing his failing strength spent itself to say, and it was not a curse. And it was not a farewell. It was run. She did not run. She got her hands under his arms. He was deadweight and slick with his own blood, and she was one scentless girl who had never been strong enough to matter, and she hauled him backward, toward the black doorway of the cottage, with a strength she did not own, sobbing through her teeth, while out in the dark the thing gathered to come again. She got him over the threshold one instant before it reached them, and the thing hit the doorway behind her like a wave hitting a seawall, and the house caught it. She never understood what she saw then, and she stopped trying. The old warmth in the stones had turned to something with edges, something that filled the doorway like a held breath and would not let the dark thing pass, and the creature threw itself against that unseen wall again and again, while the whole house shook and dust sifted from the beams. Whatever slept in these walls knew its king, lay bleeding on its floor, and it had woken all the way at last, and it was furious. Eloin crouched over Emmerich in the roaring dark, her hands pressed to the terrible heat pouring out of his side, and she did not know if the walls would hold, or if he was already dead beneath her hands, or how a girl with no wolf was meant to save the last king of the north from the thing that had already killed him once. Outside, in the shuddering black, the creature stopped throwing itself at the door, and began, very patiently, to walk around the house. Dawn came gray and grudging, and with it, the thing at the door gave up. She felt it go the way you feel, a fever break, a loosening in the air, and through the one unshuttered window she watched the dark unknot itself from the corner of the house, and slink back down the valley toward the tree line. It did not go far. It settled at the edge of the wood, a wrongness among the trunks, patient as a stain, and she understood that it would wait there through all the daylight hours, and come again the moment the sun went down. It had already waited 40 years, it could wait a day more. She turned back to the man on the floor. The wound was worse in the light than it had been in the dark. She did what Emmerich himself had taught her on the golden days, packed it and bound it and kept it clean. And she was steady about it, she was proud of that, she did not let her hands shake until it was done. But she had gutted enough hairs by then to know the difference between a hurt a body could mend and a hurt it could not, and this was the second kind. A wolf's deep wounds were healed by the wolf, by the hot animal patience that lived under a shifter's skin and knit them back together faster than any medicine. Emmerich had no wolf. There was nothing under his skin to do the knitting. He had spent the one thing he did not have to spare, and he had spent it on her. Maren came at first light, as she had promised, with her cart and the empty seat that was meant to carry Eloin south. She took one look through the doorway and did not say a word about the cart again. She was good, in the way country women are good, unhurried and unhorrified, and she brought clean linen and hard liquor and a grim, gentle competence that steadied Eloin more than any comfort could have. But when Aloan followed her out to the cart at midday, Marin's face was not gentle at all. A wound like that on a wolf with no wolf. Marin shook her head. My girl, I will not lie to you, because you have had enough people lie to you kindly. He should be dead already. That he is not is that house, and it will not hold him up forever. And I cannot stay past dusk. You know I cannot. Whatever that is at the tree line, the arrangement my grandmother's grandmother made, does not cover me sitting in its supper with the light gone. She gripped Aloan's arm, hard. Come down with me. There is nothing you can do here but watch him go and be there when the dark comes back for you. There is one thing I can do, Aloan said. I cannot leave him. I have been left. I know exactly what it is worth, and I will not pay it to him. Marin looked at her a long moment, and then she sighed. And she unloaded every last thing from the cart, all of it, and left it on the step. Then bar the door at dusk, she said, and do not open it for anything that sounds like a person. It will try that. They always try that. And she drove away down the valley, and Elowen went back inside to sit with her king, and the light began, already, to lean toward evening. The fever took him as the sun went down. It rose in him the way the dark rose outside, the two of them climbing together, and by full night he was burning and lost, tossing on the pallet she had made him by the cold hearth, talking to people who were not there. She sat beside him, and held his hand, and bathed his face, and listened to him wander through 40 years of grief. And out beyond the barred door, the thing came back and prowled the walls, and the house held, and held, and held. He did not know her. In the fever, that was the thing she had not braced for. He looked straight at her with those gray eyes gone glassy and bright, and he did not see the girl who had hauled him bleeding across the grass. He saw someone from further back. You came up the road with your chin in the air, he said, to the shadows over her shoulder, smiling at them. Do you know, I had forgotten a person could look at me like that. Not like a king, not like a ghost, like an inconvenient old man with opinions about her fire. His hand tightened on hers. You gave the air nothing and you did not care who knew it, and I thought, there she is. There's the one who was not afraid, and I was gone. I was gone before you ever bloomed. I want that written somewhere. Before there was a scent on you at all, before you lit up like a lamp, and half the north turned its head, I was already gone, over a scentless girl who glared at me like a fool when I told her she was fighting the grain. His voice cracked. Do not let her bloom near me. She will bloom. She is the kind that blooms late and all at once, and it will call the wolf out of the dark, and I would rather have loved her empty and let her go than have her die full in mine. Tell her I loved her empty. She will understand what it means. That one. She understands everything. It is the most maddening thing about her. Eloan sat in the roaring dark with his fevered hand crushed in hers, and her whole chest cracked open, because he had just handed her, without knowing it, the one thing she had wanted her entire life, and never once believed she would get. He had not fallen for the bloom, he had fallen for the empty girl, the nothing they had all thrown away, the blank shuttered house that gave the air nothing. He had loved her before there was a single thing about her worth loving by the world's cruel accounting. She pressed his hand to her mouth, and she wept, at last, all the tears she had been saving her whole life for exactly this, and had never had cause to spend, and that was when she felt it. Through his hand, through the burning skin and the failing pulse, she felt a second heartbeat, not his, not the slow, warm pulse of the house. Something further off, impossibly far, on the other side of the mountains, or the other side of the world, faint as a star and just as cold with distance, straining, beating, trying to reach them across all that dark. She did not understand it, and it frightened her more than the thing at the door, because the thing at the door at least had a shape. The far heartbeat pulsed once, hard, and every candle in the king's house guttered, flat and blue. And outside in the black, prowling the walls that would not let it in, The thing that had walked out of the world, wearing a stolen wolf, lifted its head and howled, long and hungry and afraid, as though it too had felt that far heart beating, and knew it, and had just understood, 40 years too late, that it had never truly owned the thing it stole. He did not die that night, though it was a near thing, and he did not die the next, and slowly Eloan learned the shape of the life the wound had left them. It was a life lived inside 4 walls. By day, the thing withdrew to the tree line, and she could open the door, air the house, take water, meet Marin's cart at the edge of the safe ground. By night the door was barred, the shutters down, and the two of them kept a small fire, while the dark walked the walls outside, testing, always testing, and the king's house stood between them, and it like a hand cupped around a flame. A refuge and a cage are the same building seen in different lights. Hollowmere was both. She kept a rhythm, because rhythm was the only thing that held the fear at a distance. Water, and wood, and clean linen in the mornings, while the light lasted and the things slept in the trees. The long, careful work of keeping a dying man alive through the afternoons. And at dusk, the barring of the door, the shutters down one by one, the fire built up, and the wait. She came to know the sounds it made out there, the way it circled and paused and circled, the way it would sometimes stop and speak in a voice that was almost a voice, coaxing, trying the door with words instead of wait. Marin had warned her of that. She never answered. She would take Emmerich's hand instead and hold on. And somehow they would both still be there when the gray light came. Emmerich woke on the 3rd day, lucid and weak and furious to find himself alive. He was, she discovered, a terrible patient, which she told him, and he was too tired to argue, which was how she knew how bad it was. But the fury faded over the days that followed, into something quieter and more dangerous, because a man cannot stay angry forever inside a small house with the one person who has seen him at his worst and stayed anyway. The pretending fell away between them, like plaster off a wall. There was no room for it. There was barely room for the two of them, and the fire. They stopped being careful with each other. She would read to him in the long evenings from the handful of books the house held, and he would correct her pronunciation of the old words, and she would deliberately say them wrong the next time to watch him suffer, and he would laugh, and it would pull at the wound, and he would swear, and she would not apologize. She learned the geography of him, the way you learn a person you are nursing, without shame on either side. He learned, she thought, that he was allowed to be looked after, which she suspected no one had done for him in the whole of his impossible life. One night, when the fever had come and gone and left him wrung out and honest, he told her the thing he had never told anyone. Not how he had lost his wolf, but how it had felt in the 40 years after. The particular loneliness of a man who could neither die nor be known, who gave no cent for anyone to read, and so walked through the world behind glass. I stopped speaking to people, he said, staring into the fire. There was no point. They could not scent me, and half of what a wolf says, it says without a word. I was a locked room with the key thrown down a well, and I told myself I preferred it. He turned his head to look at her. And then a girl bought the wrong house and glared at me when I told her she was fighting the grain, and I found I had a great deal left to say after all. Eloan did not answer with words. She had lost the words under the words herself all her life, and only just begun to find them. And some things are better, said the way wolves say them. She moved to sit beside him, instead of across from him, and leaned her head against his good shoulder, and felt through the place where they touched the wordless relief of a man who had been alone for 40 years, and was at last no longer. And when their hands met over a cup, or a bandage, or a turned page, the strange thing that had started on the golden days grew stronger, until she could feel him through her fingertips as clearly as she could feel the fire on her face. His guilt, banked and constant, his fear, all of it for her and none of it for himself, and under both, steady as the pulse in the walls, his love so plain and so enormous that she wondered how he had ever imagined he was hiding it. "You are doing it again," she told him one night. "Pursing your mouth before you say something you have decided not to say. I can feel it now, you know. Whatever you swallow, I taste it." He looked at her for a long moment in the firelight. "That should not be possible," he said quietly. "Not without a wolf. Not from me." And yet, he agreed, and his hand turned over under hers, palm to palm, and neither of them pretended it was an accident. It was the far heartbeat, more than anything, that drove her to the portrait. She had felt it every night since the fever, that distant straining pulse, a little less distant each night, as though whatever it was had heard her and begun the long walk home. And she had noticed it was strongest near the wall where the young king's painted eyes watched over the cottage. So, one gray afternoon, with Emeric asleep, she crossed to the portrait and pressed her palm flat to it, the way she had that first night, and listened with everything she had. The warmth was there under her hand, but now that she knew to feel for it, she could tell it was not coming from the stone. It was coming from behind the paint, from the panel itself, from something the painter had sealed into the wood along with the likeness, something small and warm and alive, and very, very tired, guttering like the last ember in a grate at the end of a long cold night. She understood it then, all at once, the way she had understood her own scent. The house did not merely remember its king, it was keeping something of him. On the night Varric took the wolf, someone who loved Emeric had not been able to stop the theft, but had managed, at the last, to catch a single ember of it, the way you snatch one live coal from a dying fire, and had sealed it into a portrait and buried the portrait in a wall so the thief could never find the last of what he had failed to fully steal. For 40 years the house had guarded that ember, one coal against the dark, keeping the king's wolf from dying altogether, which was why he had not simply ended in the first hour, why he had worn on far past his time, why the walls breathed when he was near. And the ember was going out. She could feel it, dimmer than it had been 6 nights ago. It was dimming because he was dying, the man and the ember failing together, two ends of the same guttering thread, and when it went out the last of Emeric's wolf would go with it. The theft Varric began 40 years ago at last complete, and there would be nothing left in all the world to call home. She did not tell Emeric what she had found. She could not have said why, except that he had guarded this last ember for 40 years, without once spending it to save himself, and she understood that if she told him it was dying, he would only be glad. It would mean the long watch was nearly over. It would mean she would have to leave. He wanted to go. That was the most terrible thing she had learned in the small barred house, worse than the thing at the walls. Some part of him, worn past caring, wanted the ember to gutter out and let him rest. She was not going to allow it. She had come 5 days north with nothing, bought a grave site unseen, and found a king in a wall. And she was not about to watch the last light of him go out for want of trying. Elowen stood with her hand on the failing warmth and her heart in her throat, and behind her, through the window, the light was going gold across the valley, the long gold of a dying afternoon. And down the south road, riding up into that gold light in a long, bright column, their armor and their pennants catching the sun, came 30 riders in the gold and gray of Ashfell, with a broad gold-haired man at their head who sat his horse, as though the whole valley had been laid out for him personally. Cadden had found her at last. He was exactly as she remembered him, and she felt nothing, which was its own kind of revelation. Elowen. He swung down from his horse at the edge of the safe ground, all warmth and white teeth, and came toward her with his arms a little open, as though they had parted friends. He checked, once, when her scent reached him, and she watched his eyes widen and go dark, watched the calculation move behind them. "By the moon, it's true. Look at you." The whole north is talking of a scent that came up out of nowhere in the high valleys, sweeter than anything in a generation. And I said to myself, I know, that could not be. And yet, here you are. He shook his head, marveling, hungry. You bloomed. You actually bloomed. I did, she said. Rather a lot has happened. Come home. He said it simply as though it settled everything. Whatever this place is, whatever's been keeping you, it's done now. I was a fool, Eloan. I'll say it in front of my own writers. I was a fool at the choosing. But a man can't be blamed for what he cannot scent. And now the whole world can scent you, and there is not a pack in the north that would not open its gates to us. Come home and be what you were always meant to be. And Odette? Eloan asked, the one you chose in front of everyone. Something flickered across his handsome face and was smoothed away. Odette did not take, he said, as though describing a crop that had failed. It was never a true bond, only an arrangement, and no sensible man holds to an arrangement when the moon puts something rare in front of him. And Eloan understood. She was hearing exactly what he would one day say about her, to the next bright thing that turned his head. He glanced past her at the low grim house, the barred shutters, and his lip curled. You cannot mean to stay in a cursed ruin with whatever old thing crawled in here to die. That old thing, Eloan said, is worth 10 of you, and had the small satisfaction of watching him blink. But it was Emmerich's voice, from the doorway, that undid her. He had dragged himself upright somehow, one hand white-knuckled on the frame, gray-faced and swaying, spending strength. He did not have to stand where Cadan could see him, and when he spoke, it was not to Cadan at all. It was to her, and his voice was terribly gentle, and she knew before he said a word that he was about to try to save her life by breaking her heart. Go with him, Emmerich said. No, Eloan. Look at me. Look at what you would be staying for. His mouth twisted. He is right, and it cost me everything I have left to say it. He can give you a whole wolf, and a true bond, and a hall full of light, and a long ordinary life with a man who will not be dead by the turning of the season. I can give you a grave, and a siege, and a ghost. The thing you feel for me is your bloom reaching for the nearest wolf in the dark. That is all it is. It is not real. You would feel the same pull toward him within a month. And there she felt it, shart through the bond that ran between them now, whether he willed it or not. The enormous shining lie of it, the way the words cost him. The way each one flayed him as it left his mouth. He did not believe a single one. He was saying them anyway, because he would rather she hated him and lived than loved him and died, and it was the bravest and the most cowardly thing she had ever seen a person do. And it was so exactly the same wound she had watched him carry from the first day that she could have screamed. You are pursing your mouth, she said, very quietly. He flinched. You are lying, Emmerich, and I can taste every word of it, so do not stand there bleeding to death, and tell me what I feel. Her voice was shaking now and she let it. I have been told what I am, my whole life empty, broken, nothing worth choosing. I believed every one of them until I met a man who looked at the nothing and wanted it anyway. You do not get to be one more voice telling me I am reaching for the wrong thing. I know exactly what I am reaching for. Behind her, Cadan made an impatient sound. And beyond him, at the tree line, the gold was going out of the afternoon, the long shadows reaching across the grass toward them all, and Eloan felt the temperature of the whole valley begin, very slightly, to drop. My lady, Cadan said, and now there was an edge of unease under the charm. The light is going. My scouts will not stay in this valley after dark. They've been strange about it since we crossed the ridge. And frankly, so have I. Whatever you've decided, decide it now, because we ride within the hour, with you or without you. The sun touched the western hills. In her own cottage behind the wall, Eloan felt the last ember of a king's wolf gutter down to almost nothing. And out among the darkening trees, the thing that had been waiting all day lifted its head and tasted the coming night, and began, unhurried, to come. Elowen turned her back on Cadan, on his 30 riders, and his warm hall, and his whole wolf and his long ordinary life, and she walked to the dying king in the doorway, and she took his face in both her hands. Not the wolf, not the crown, not the life. I was promised by people who never once asked what I wanted. You, the empty man who wanted the empty girl. I would rather have one season of you than a lifetime of anyone else, and if that is a foolish thing to spend a life on, then I am a fool, and I have earned the right to be one, and I am choosing it with my eyes open. Do you hear me? I am not reaching in the dark. I see exactly what I am choosing, and I choose you. I choose you. I choose you. And she kissed him. For one heartbeat, he was too stunned, too far gone, to answer. And then he made a sound against her mouth, like a man surfacing from deep water, and his arms came around her with the last of his strength, and he kissed her back as though she were air, and he had been drowning for 40 years. And everything he had been holding away from her since the first day at last came pouring through their joined hands and joined mouths, and the bond that had been forming in secret between them for weeks. And it was not a small thing, and it did not stay quiet. The bond completed. She felt it lock into place inside her like a key, finally turning the whole way in a lock, and in the same instant, she understood, with the clean total certainty of a thing you were born knowing, and had only forgotten, what she was, what she had always been. Not broken, not empty, veiled. An omega whose scent stays sealed her whole life, because it is not meant for the whole world, only for one wolf. The single wolf, she was made to answer, held back until the one right soul comes near enough to break the seal. She had never been the nothing they named her. She had been a locked door, with only one key in all the world, and she had walked to the very end of it and found him. And a true bond, fully made, is stronger than any theft. She felt her bond drive down through the kiss, through the failing man, through the guttering ember behind the wall of her cottage, and out, across the dark in the mountains, down the long cold thread to the far heartbeat that had been walking home to her for 6 nights, and she seized it and she called it, the way a mate calls a mate. With a claim, older than crowns, older than theft, older than the rot that had held it prisoner for 40 years. Come home, she said without words. He is here. I am here. Come home. And the wolf answered. Out among the trees, the thing that was Varric threw back its head and screamed, because it felt the summons tear through it, felt the stolen thing it had rotted itself around for 40 years turn in its grip and strain toward a call it could not refuse. It fought. It had held the wolf against its true master for a lifetime, and it fought now with everything it had left. And for a moment, the whole valley shook with the tug-of-war of it, the thief and the mate hauling on the same soul from opposite ends of the dark. But Varric had only chains. Elowen had a bond, freely made and freely chosen. And there has never in the history of the world been a chain that could outpull a thing that chooses to come home. The wolf tore free. She felt it leave the rotten place it had been kept, felt it come roaring back up the thread toward them faster than falling. And out in the dark, Varric came apart, all at once. 40 stolen years, arriving in a single instant, the way a held breath finally leaves a corpse. And where the thief had stood, there was nothing but a long sigh and a fall of cold ash onto the grass. And then, not even that. The ember behind the wall blazed up bright as a hearth. And into Amaric of Valemore, into the dying wolfless shell of the last king of the north, his own wolf came home at last. He gasped against her mouth. She felt it happen, felt the hot animal patience flood back into him through the bond, felt the terrible wound in his side begin, at last, to knit. Color came back into his grave face. Strength came back into the arms around her. And a scent came up off his skin, rich and living, and utterly his pine, and cold, clean stone and warm, dark earth. The scent she had reached for on the very first day in her cottage, and caught nothing at all, and now she caught all of it, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever smelled in her life. They broke apart, both of them shaking. He stared at her whole and healing and mortal again, aging at last, alive at last. And she watched him scent her in return, watched him breathe her in the way she had watched Kadan fail to, at the choosing. And she saw the exact moment the whole of her reached the whole of him. "There you are," Emmerich said, wondering. "There you are. I have been trying to smell you for weeks." Behind them, forgotten, Kadan and his 30 riders were already gone, fled at the first scream into the falling dark, leaving nothing behind but hoofprints and the memory of a golden man who had once again failed to understand what he was looking at. Neither of them noticed. The king's house breathed easy around them, slow and warm and content. Its long watch ended, and above the valley, the first stars came out over two people who had each been called nothing their whole lives and had turned out to be the only thing the other had ever needed. They came down out of Hollowmere in the spring, because the packs of the north had called a gathering to choose themselves a king. Kadan had called it, in fact. He had spent the winter riding hall to hall with his tale of the empty crown and the reunion of the north, careful never to mention the valley he had fled, and by the thaw he had talked half the old families into a great meeting below the mountains, where he meant, everyone understood, to be crowned. He had not counted on guests. Eloan felt the hall go still before she understood why. She and Emmerich had come in quietly at the back, no banners, no announcement, a broad iron-gray man and a dark-haired woman in traveling clothes, and for a moment no one placed them. Then the scent of them reached the room, his and hers together, a mated pair, a true bond, the kind of scent the North had not smelled in 40 years, and one old wolf, near the front, went to his knees before his mind had caught up with his nose, and then another, and then the whole hall was turning, the whispers running along it like fire along a fuse. It's him. It cannot be. The scar, the eyes. The king has come back. Kadan, half risen from the great chair he had not quite dared to sit in yet, went the color of old ash. Emmerich crossed the hall unhurried, aging, ordinary, mortal, more of a king with every plain step than Kadan had managed in a lifetime of trying, and Eloan walked at his side with her chin level, the way she had learned to hold it in a lifetime of being pitied. Only now, no one in any hall pitied her at all. They passed close by Kadan. He was staring at her as though she had risen from a grave, taking in the scent of her, the bond on her, the unreachable completeness of her. "Eloan," he managed. "Your Majesty," she corrected him pleasantly, and did not stop walking, and left him standing there with his crown, that would never now be his, and did not once look back. Later, when the shouting and the kneeling and the long business of a kingdom, remembering itself had quieted, she stood with Emmerich under a sky thick with early stars, and through the bond she felt him, all of him, warm and whole and no longer running from a single thing. "They called us both nothing," she said. "A king with no wolf, an omega with no scent. They did." She felt him smile. They were not paying attention. His thumb moved over her knuckles. "We had each other's the whole time. We were only waiting to be introduced. Thanks for listening to the end. Here's what I want to know. Was Emmerich right to send Eloan away to keep her safe, even lying to do it, or wrong to make that choice for her, instead of letting her decide? Tell me in the comments. If this story kept you company, leave a like, and I will see you soon with another.